Welcome to the Western New York Athletics High School Football Weekly Show with Frank Wolf and Dick Gallagher, brought to you by Scroy Financial in West Seneca, Danny's Restaurant with 2 locations, 3715 Genesee Street in Cheektowaga and in Orchard Park on Abbott Road near the stadium, and G&G Fitness at 7350 Transit Road near Main Street in Amherst. Check them out on the web at livefit.com.
Hello and welcome, high school football fans, to the WNY Athletics High School Football Weekly YouTube show. And right now, you don't see one of your usual hosts, Frank Wolf. My name is Jon Simon. I am in for Frank today, but the man who is still here is the man, not really a myth, but is definitely a legend, Dick Gallagher, here once again. And I'm excited to be here with you today to talk some high school football.
That's very nice. Thank you.
So, Dick, it was an interesting week 4. Couple big wins that we saw. A couple teams improving their spot in the playoff race. Some teams pushing themselves up and inserting themselves into the playoff race. So, was there any certain matchups in week 4 that really caught your eye and really stood out amongst the others?
Well, I think Cheektowaga defeated Pioneer, said that basically the Warriors are back and they're going to be a force in the playoffs. Our Pioneer had like 4 turnovers. So that hurt them big time. Sweet home victory over Star Point, 46-38. That game was lost by Spartans in the latter part of the first half with less than a couple of minutes left on a pass play that was 4th down, and Carson Marcus tried to do a quick pass to Joe Carlson. The next thing you know, Tyrell Laws went 97 yards for a touchdown. That changed the whole momentum of the game. And what stood out in that game is the second time I saw him. Jamal Lucas is going to be the most explosive player playing, and he has to be a Division I prospect. He just is outstanding.
Yeah, well, that Sweet Home win, that was one of the games that I was really thinking of when I said a team that is pushing themselves into a playoff position. And on the other end, for Star Point, we'll look into some Week 5 games later on, but they got an interesting matchup with South Park this week coming up on Friday. And for the Spartans, now with that loss, they're kind of going to want to keep themselves in the race for first place in that A1 division, A2, excuse me.
And also Al Cavanaro, the head football coach, announced after the first week of the season he's going to resign at the end of the year. He's got 98 victories, needs 2 more to reach the coveted 100-win club. And he's playing South Park, and he's got a couple of tough games. But I really believe that Star Point does not match up well with South Park. In South Park, 200 points scored, 39 points allowed, beating last year's state runner-up, West Seneca East, 70-20 or 20.
Yeah, it was
6.
Handled it. They handled them.
They're just dominating. And they won the state championship in 2015. Their quarterback is not as good as Tyree, but he's good, or he can do what he needs to do. Their defense, they've got Marquand Fluid, who's got 10 sacks in 4 games. Spartans are going to have to play a perfect game to even be able to be in that game.
Well, of course, we will move on to the games that are coming up this week. But first, let's take a look back at the Week 4 highlights given to us from our friend Tom Repicci from Prepstar.
Here are the Western New York Athletics Week 5 Power Rankings, starting with the small schools. Number 10, Tonawanda. Number 9, Akron. Number 8, Portville. Number 7, Clymer, Sherman, Panama. Number 6, Wilson. Number 5, Franklinville, Ellicottville. Number 4, Albion. Number 3, Cheektowaga. Number 2, Western New York Maritime and Health Sciences. Number 1, Southwestern. In the large school Week 5 Power Rankings, coming in at number 10, Bennett. Number 9, McKinley. Number 8, Clarence. Number 7, Jamestown. Number 6, Lancaster. Number 5, South Park. Number 4, Orchard Park. Number 3, Canisius. Number 2, St. Joe's. And number 1, St. Francis.
And welcome back, high school football fans. Once again, we would like to thank Tom Repicci from Prepstar for those highlights from Week 4. And while there was some great highlights, there was also a lot of great performers. So let's take a quick look at the list of the Connolly Cup Top Performers from this past week. And while there was a lot of top Connolly Cup performers, Dick, there was also a lot of good performances on the line as well. So let's take a look at our Trench Trophy nominees from this past week.
Hey, Josh Allen.
Hey, thanks for coming by.
Big fan.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about that teamwork.
Yeah, that's West Her. Get the right people, working together, making connections. In fact, show me what you got. I'm going long.
Really?
Woo. Made me work for it, but anything worth doing.
Listen, I know you're good at this TV deal, but maybe you should try the football thing.
We didn't get here by accident. It starts with a plan to protect your future, to invest in your future. It started with Scroy Financial. Plan, protect, invest. Scroy Financial.
We needed a plan to protect what matters most. By investing in our future, that all started with Scroy Financial. Plan, protect, invest. Scroy Financial.
Welcome back, high school football fans. So as you just saw, those were some of the top Connolly Cup performers from Week 4 here in Section 6, along with some Trench Trophy nominees. But now that we're past the midway point of the regular season high school football, Dick, and actually, as we're recording, this is the first day of October. The calendar pages have turned, and we're really in the key month here in high school football. So right off the bat, are there any divisional races that are really enticing to you that are going to come down to the wire that people are going to want to look out for?
I think AA with Lancaster, Jamestown, and Orchard Park, those three teams. In A1, West Seneca West seems to be the force. A2, South Park. Then if you look at B1, Pioneer, Orchard Park, Pioneer, Cheektowaga, and then with the two, Iroquois and Maritime, look like the two playoff teams. Olean and Albion and Lackawanna are vying for the 3. And then in the B4, which is the weakest class in Bs, Tonawanda and Newfane will be the 2. C North, you have to give, Wilson, a leg up. But the unfortunate thing, Adam Mates, who counted for 6 touchdowns last week, first play of the game against Wilson, got hurt, injured, might not be able to play the rest of the season. That hurts big time. But then when you look at Class C period, Southwestern, they're just dominating, and they've only given up, I think, 16 points. They're averaging about 35, 40 points a game. And then in the D's, I think in the sectional championship, it has to be CSP in Franklinville and Ellicottville.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and as we mentioned, we'll preview some of these Week 5 matchups in a little bit, but there is one that sticks out that's pretty important in that Class AA race, and of course that is the matchup between the Lancaster Legends and the Bennett Tigers, a rematch of a game last year where Bennett gave the Legends their first loss in Section 6 in a long time, and with them already having dropped a game to Clarence this year in league play, I feel like, you know, this is a big game coming up for the Legends, for them to really make sure that they stay atop that division and have a chance at some home field advantage in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that Bennett likes playing on turf. This is a grass field for Lancaster, and so as long as Lancaster doesn't lose the battle of the turnovers, because last week's game showed that Bennett's got some injuries and they need to have healthy players, particularly DeJohn Perry, if they're going to be able to compete, in the playoffs. And
DeJay Perry last year in that matchup against Lancaster at All High Stadium he's had a lot of really good games in his career at Bennett, but that game last year against the Legends was probably one of the best that we've seen from him in his tenure, and I would have to think that the Lancaster team is going to be preparing for him very, very much. I think that he's going to be probably number one at the top of their list of guys to watch out for.
Well, I think Connor Mahoney and Matt Messenger, the two linebackers, and both are all West New York candidates, they're going to have their eye on Perry. But last year's game, as well as many games that Perry played last year and this year, he is a very physical, if not the most physical player I've seen carrying the ball. It's not like a stiff arm for him. It's like it's an ammunition or something, because he just varies over. But he only carried the ball 11 times last week's game, had about 37 yards. He's going to be over 100 for them to be able, and a couple of touchdowns for them to beat the Legends.
And when you move from AA down to A1, there's actually a matchup that's going to be happening tonight, Tuesday, October 1st, that will certainly have a little bit of implications on the playoffs as Kenmore West and McKinley meet. They're both 3-0 overall. Kenmore West 3-0 in their league, McKinley 2-0 in A1. That's a game that was canceled a few weeks ago, was figured back out. They rescheduled it, and that's going to have some big implications in A1. Is there anything about that game that's sticking out to you at all?
Well, I think Zach Boyes in 3 games really is dominated, and he's got 6 touchdowns rushing, 6 touchdowns passing, and he plays 4 sports. He letters in 4 sports. He excels at all 4: football, basketball, baseball, and golf. And I think that McKinley, when you look at their speed and talent and athleticism, that's going to be about smash mouth football, and the coaches will have their teams ready, and those 2 teams could also be in the playoffs once the regular season is completed.
And that's a big game for both McKinley and Kenmore West too, because there's a team in that division in West Seneca West who's right on their heels. They handled Williamsville North last week on Friday night, and the rest of their schedule looked relatively easy. They've got North Tonawanda and Niagara Wheatfield, 2 teams that are kind of in the bottom half of that division, and then they end the regular season in their rivalry game with West Seneca East. So really, if you're Kenmore West and McKinley, there's no room for error right now, because that West Seneca West Indians team, we all know how dangerous they can be.
Right, and I think that 2 of those 2 teams are going to be in the sectional championship. In the semis. But I think that South Park is pretty much a lock in their end. But I think when you look at West Seneca West, it's not the West Seneca West in the last few years when they had 2 outstanding quarterbacks.
Right.
And Liam Shore is a tremendous lineman, and he also is a 225-pound, 6'4" quarterback. He's heavy and a load to bring down. But that's why they play the game. This game tonight is extremely important.
So you mentioned South Park pretty much the favorites in A2, possibly the favorite in Class A altogether. Now, we had just mentioned how close A1's race is going to be. A2's kind of the same way because I mentioned a few minutes ago, Sweet Home with their win over Star Point, they pushed themselves back into the race. Williamsville South is also 2-2 in the league, along with West Seneca East, the defending sectional champions. I mean, after South Park and Star Point, you've got 4 teams that are 2-2 in that league, and there's probably some key matchups later in the year that's going to move things around. But between Grand Island, West Seneca East, Sweet Home, and Williamsville South, those 4 teams are going to be battling for what seems like the last 2 spots in A2. And if there's any teams out there that you feel like have the edge right now, what are they?
Well, right now I think South Park's got the edge, and I think if Kenmore West can beat, McKinley, they might have the edge. But when you look at the overall league this year, in the Section 6, you have to look at it that last year there were many more power teams, many more power players, and it really allowed for wonderful games and tremendous. Sometimes you'd have 4 or 5 teams scoring 60 points a game. So this year is not as, I think, as productive as far as the outstanding players, but there's a lot of key players that can make a lot of noise in the playoffs, and it depends on how much the kids want them, how much they want to play, and how they're going to be focused. The other side of the coin, for example, Williamsville South, they surprised everyone beating Grand Island, but they also have to play South Park, and they also have to play another tough matchup. So they've got to really bring their game to another level to be able to make one of the 4 teams in A2.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with those 4 teams all at 2-2 with just 3 games left on the schedule. It's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out. It could come down to point differential for all we know. It could be some sort of tiebreaker that gives a team the benefit of getting into the playoffs. But shifting over to B, we've talked about Cheektowaga a little bit. They're still sitting at the top of their division after, what was a week 1 loss to Maritime that seemed to shock a lot of people. But in your eyes, do you still feel like Cheektowaga's got the best chance to run the table in Class B? And if not, who's that team that could kind of be on their heels and maybe surpass them?
I think Cheektowaga's got an edge. They started a young quarterback without a lot of experience. They had 4 turnovers in that game against Maritime. I don't think you're going to see Mike Fadden and Scott Zip allowing that to happen again. And Pioneer only lost by 7 points, so just the 2 teams, depending on the seeding, could wind up playing for the Bees. But Albion last year undefeated after 7 games, lost first game in the playoffs. This year looked like they could also be undefeated after 7 games. And then when you have to play a Cheektowaga, Pioneer, the Purple Eagles could have to bring their game to another level.
And of course, with the Class B playoffs this year, with there being 4 separate divisions, I'll be honest with you, Dick, I can't even follow how exactly they're going to figure out getting all those Class B teams into the playoffs, where they're going to come from each. I know it's the winner of each of the divisions is going to get in, but after that, it's from what I understand, it's a little bit of a wild card as to what other Class B teams are going to make it in there.
I think, and I might be wrong, but it's the first 2. Whoever is 1 and 2. So you could have 8 teams, and then how that is then seeded is going to be huge, because in the last couple of years you've had a 7 and 8 team beat a 2 or 3 or 1 team. So it's just they got to play the game. They got to be able to want it. But I think that, and I could be wrong in this, but it'll be the first 2. In the past, if they were going to be taking 2 leagues and they were taking 4, they would work it out so that they would have the 2 best and 3 best, and then you'd have the best record overall of a team that didn't fall in the top 3.
And it's a different sort of format. Is that something that you feel is the right way to go about it with this format of the playoffs?
They change it every year.
Yeah.
It's based on the number of teams, the number of leagues. And this year they did it something like, I have no idea where Kenny Stoltz and the committee came up with it, but they figured that there was 20 teams And the best thing was to have 4 leagues and 5 teams, so 5 teams in each league.
And I always wondered, I mean, is that tougher for coaches to kind of have to change year in and year out how they really have to go about things? I mean, obviously, I assume every coach has the approach that we have a 7-game schedule or 8-game schedule. Every game is of the utmost importance. We have to win every game. But with the way that you have to go about figuring out how you're going to get into the playoffs each year, how many teams you have to go against, you know, that's got to be one of the bigger challenges for a high school football coach in this area.
Definitely.
So moving from B down to C, we talked about already the race between Akron and Wilson. They faced each other head-to-head in Week 4 with Wilson coming out on top. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Akron Tigers with Adam Meats being out. By the way, you were right. He is a tremendous athlete, great quarterback. Him and their sophomore running back, Aiden Smith, in the game where they defeated Cleveland Hill in Week 3, those guys were absolutely incredible. So his loss is definitely going to hurt Akron a little bit. But, let's talk a little bit about the south side of Class C with Southwestern, especially with their head coaches on his way out. I understand after this week will be his last game with the Southwestern Trojans. So where are they going to go from here after that?
Well, I think Southwestern has the opportunity of not only winning and competing for a sectional championship, but out for a state championship. They're loaded at every position. They got a tremendous line. 2 transfers from Dunkirk, which were Dunkirk's 2 best players, Conrad Thomas and Tyron Wright. And they're lighting it up. And then now with Jehu leaving, what I can't understand is they're 4 games into the season. How you could not wait at least till the season was over before you had to make the move. But it is what it is. The assistant coach has been there for years. He knows the program, he knows the kids, and I think with the talent that they have, he won't miss a beat. Excuse me, and I only see one team that's strong in Southwestern, and Southwestern's already shown that, defeating the other major contenders in Class C South. And then on C North, I think Akron loses a ton not having Meats available. If he's not going to be able to compete in the playoffs, Wilson's going to be a very competitive team. Cleveland Hill, I can't believe Akron beat them 47-0. I don't think anyone beat them in the last century, 47-0. So it'll be an interesting matchups.
Yeah, and of course we were talking about Jehu Kalkrick, the head coach at Southwestern, leaving after this week to take a job with Zenith, company that creates football helmets, kind of researches player safety. So at least he's sticking around the game, Dick. I mean, he is leaving the school a little early, but he is sticking around the game and doing something good for players at all levels.
Well, he excelled in high school, leading his team to 4 sectional championships, get to the state semifinals 1 year. He excelled in college in Michigan State, set some records out there. He excelled, in the NFL with 4 teams that he played for, including the Bills. And now he is coaching and has been in sectional championship the last couple of years, or maybe even be 3 years in a row. And now they're going to be in it again. So he's leaving at the right time. His legacy is uncharted because there's not too many kids that have played on 4 sectional championships. And by playing in the D League, he was a man among boys. He could have played in the AA League. He would have been man among boys. It was special to watch him and fun to watch him for the 4 years he played.
And like you said, Southwestern's a good program. Their assistant coach who's taken over has been there a long time. They were great before Kalkrick showed up. I think they're going to be just fine after he walks out the door after this game coming up this week. And I believe, I actually have to remember who they're playing. I believe it is Lackawanna. So non-league game in his finale with Southwestern, which that'll be an interesting matchup. I got to see Lackawanna earlier this year, Week 1 against Tonawanda. That's a team that's got a really good defense on them, and they got some good runners on their team as well.
I'm surprised Albion was able to shut him out, and Lackawanna has outstanding talent. They've got 3 or 4 freshmen that are starting, and you give the Steelers a few years down the road, they're going to be dynamite.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we move to Class D, where it seems like the championship in this league is really Franklinville and Ellicottville and CSP. I feel like they're on a collision course to play each other at the stadium this year. And you kind of mentioned that earlier. Those are your thoughts as well, that these two teams are pretty much the favorites to take the Class D crown here in Second.
Well, I think the Titans dominated CSP in the game, won by 20 points, whatever. And I don't know if CSP is going to be able to match up with Franklinville and Ellicottville. Jason March is the new coach. He was at Salamanca for years. He's outstanding coach, and Logan Frank, outstanding two-way player. I just think the Titans are grooming themselves not just to win a sectional championship, but competing for a state championship.
So, of course, as the season continues, as the weeks go on, in the playoffs, they come closer. Frank, Wolf, Dick, they'll be talking more and more about these playoff races. But right now, things are really starting to take shape, and things they're starting to get interesting. But we are going to go to a quick break. But before we do, I want to take a second to thank a number of our sponsors here at WNY Athletics. That includes G&G Fitness, Scroy Financial, the West Hurt family of dealerships, UBMD Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, and A-Turf. So that is our sponsors. Thank you to them, as always, for sponsoring not only this YouTube broadcast, but our Mixler games. Anytime our staff is out there covering games and reporting on Twitter, on the website. So without our sponsors, obviously, really, most of that stuff, if not all of it, is possible. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk Week 5 matchups and, anything else we have before we wrap up the show here. But thanks for tuning in with us. We'll be right back.
Why do you exercise? To look better? To feel better? To drop a few pounds? To train for an event? To defy age? Or to keep your ability to say yes to the things you love to do? Whatever motivates you, G&G Fitness Equipment is here to get you there. Treadmills, ellipticals, rowers, bikes, home gyms, and accessories. We'll pair you with the right equipment, teach you how to use it, and be there every step of your fitness journey. G&G Fitness. Your goal is our goal.
And welcome back to WNY Athletics High School Football Weekly YouTube show. I'm Jon Simon, sitting in for Frank Wolf with Dick Gallagher. And before we jump into the Week 5 games that are coming up this week, Dick, let's talk about Monsignor Martin this past week. St. Joe's, they played LaSalle, coming off of their first win against Canisius since 2011. But the Marauders had a bit of a difficult second half that we were just talking about.
48 to nothing. St. Joe's had 3 first downs in the game, and what I had mentioned was that if the stats are correct, then the second half St. Joe's only had the ball for 3 minutes and 35 seconds. That's what a dominating performance that was. So St. Joe's now plays St. Francis, but one of the concerns I have now is when you take a look at the B League. Timon got blasted again. They've scored 18 points. They've given up, too many points. The St. Mary's is 0-3. Cardinal O'Hara is 0-3, and they've had to forfeit their game this week against Binghamton. That doesn't bode well for the Hawks, and I'm worried about their future. When you take a look at, they couldn't play the first game because they didn't have enough players that had X amount of practice. So, and if you're looking at 0-8, then if you look at Franny's, they're number 1 in the Buffalo News poll this year. The interesting thing is, St. Joe's 2-2, they're ranked 5th. It's Canisius, 1 win, 3 losses, they're ranked 9th or 10th. But you got to give credit to Canisius. They play power team in Pennsylvania, power team in Ohio, and then St. Joe's, which is really dominated Bennett and dominated pretty much Canisius. So it'll be interesting. There's still a lot of games to play.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump to Canisius and talk about them real quick. They bounced back after the St. Joe's loss with a 40-0 win over Maritime Charter Health and Sciences. But for this Canisius team, I mean, Francis Beck and I talked to Rich Robbins on the Friday Night Final Drive show before the St. Joe's game, and he kind of said that this is a group that is still expecting to win, after that 0-2 start. They played very good teams in Ohio and Pennsylvania. He understood that, the group understood that, and it was kind of growing games for them, games where they could learn a lot, get experience playing against top talent. But, to go into the St. Joe's game and lose that game to your rival for the first time in a long time, they bounced back with the win. But do you see anything in this Canisius team that shows that they have the ability to still turn this season around? Because for Canisius standards, this isn't the best of seasons for them.
I think if you have a quarterback, you can make things happen. They got Tyler Baker, only a sophomore, but he's done well, and he is a force. And defensively, you have C.J. Osland's a senior who should be playing Division I college next year, but he's an outstanding two-way player. He can run the ball, but he's a tremendous defensive end, a lot of explosiveness. And Jojo Dixon, or John Dixon, but he's an outstanding runner. He's a transfer from Niagara Falls, take him a little bit, get acclimated to the Crusader system. So they're going to be a force in the playoffs. The good thing about the Monsignor Martin, 1948-50, they had 16 teams playing football. Now they have 6, 3 in the AA, 3 in the A, and 3 in the B. The Bs are not good at all this year.
Yeah.
And in the A's, Canisius can be a force, St. Joe's can be a force, and definitely St. Francis a force. Ritz had 3,600 yards passing last year, 36 touchdowns, broke some records. He's played 4 games, 300 yards passing in each game, 3 or 4 touchdowns in each game. They're loaded, plus they got a good line, plus they got another couple of kids in that offense that can also carry the ball and make things happen. So the game on Saturday at 7, before that was treated, it was going to be a 1 o'clock game. But I think Jerry Smith likes to be able to change that to 7, mainly because you can get everyone out there. The interesting thing, which is different this year, it's only 2 games on Saturday with a Section 6.
I did see that. That is pretty strange that almost all the action is on Friday night. I mean, it's great for Francis and I. We have a lot to talk about on Friday night, but as far as the action on Saturday, it isn't a lot. But luckily for Canisius, they do have some games against the Western New York Monsignor Martin teams. They still have to play St. Francis, but they also still have Timon on the schedule, O'Hara on the schedule, so they should be able to get some wins under their belt heading into the playoffs. But it'll be interesting because that A division in Monsignor Martin is their playoffs they're going to be something. It's only 3 teams, but it is interesting, especially with the talent that all 3 of them have. Anything can happen, really.
Like you said, for 11 games, and I think 10 games in a row, Canisius won. And my grandson went to St. Joe's. He saw 4 games. They never won a game against Canisius. Either did a lot of the Marauders that went to that school. So now when St. Joe's winning that game, that sets them up for bragging rights for the rest of their lives if they live around here.
Well, it certainly would be a really, really not over. We have to wait until the season finishes. But if the Marauders can knock off St. Francis with their star quarterback, having already beaten Canisius, this St. Joe's team could be putting together one of the best seasons that they've had in a very long time.
Right.
And so you mentioned the St. Joe's St. Francis game this coming Saturday night at 7 o'clock. There's a lot of other games going on in Western New York. We're going to take another quick break here on the WNY Athletics High School Football Weekly Show here on YouTube. When we come back, we'll get into those Week 5 games coming up this Friday and Saturday.
We have hundreds of square feet of physical therapy in multiple locations. And with the physical therapy, we also have a strength and conditioning bridge program that can help athletes kind of specifically fine-tune their abilities and getting them back to specific sports. For people who are in tune to working with athletes of all different levels, from high school all the way up to the professional teams we take care of, this is a service that's offered through the UB Well program.
Welcome back to WNY Athletics High School Football Weekly Show here on YouTube. I'm Jon Simon, sitting in for Frank Wolf alongside Dick Gallagher. We've talked a lot about high school football here today on this show, but we talked a lot about last week's games. We talked a lot about, some other news, but what we haven't really got into, other than the St. Francis St. Joe's games, are the games coming up in Week 5. Start on Thursday, Dick. There's a pair of games that night. East Aurora visiting Newport, and then an interesting matchup, a non-league game, Clarence and Williamsville North. So what are your takeaways, or what are your thoughts about those two games?
I watched Williamsville North play West Seneca West. North does not have the offense it needs to be competitive against Clarence. Clarence got Cole Harris and Zach, I'm blocking on his name, Powers, I think, but they're a good team. They upset Lancaster, and it's going to be an interesting matchup. But I'd have to give the edge to the Red Devils.
Yeah, no, they definitely. I won't say that they put themselves on the map, because they have gotten some big wins before. But in that AA league, to beat Lancaster, that is a pretty big deal. And for Williamsville North, this is a non-league game, obviously, but they're they've taken a step back a little bit this year. They lost a lot of good seniors from the 2018 team last fall, and they got a lot of young guys in there. They might not be as big up front as a typical Williamsville North team, but yeah, I agree. I think that Clarence is going to have the edge in that matchup. But moving on to Friday night, there's plenty of action going on. Like we said, only 2 games on Saturday, so it's a loaded Friday night. Off the bat, are there any games that are really sticking out to you on Friday? What are the key games that people should be looking out for?
I think Star Point and South Park, just based on both teams being in the A2 league and both teams having quality players. I watched Carlson and the Star Point against Sweet Home. He is a player. He's got speed. He's got other stats, and he's got to be a candidate for All-Western New York, a wide receiver. Plus, last year they had 3 other wide receivers. They were catching passes. And Jake Dean, who's outstanding linebacker, also is very quick, and he catches the passes. So South Park might not be able to dominate like they did against West Seneca East and the other teams. Lackawanna and Southwestern is just an interesting game. See how Lackawanna travels to Trojan country and how they play. But I think that the line of Southwestern, who returned, I think, all 4 or 5 starters, plus getting Conrad Thomas from Dunkirk, is huge. He's 6'4", 6'5", 250 pounds. Not only tremendous lineman, but he also carries the ball for him. And then if you take a look at Bennett and Lancaster, really depends to me, even though a year ago Bennett upset Lancaster, if DeJay Perry plus a few of the other kids that are not been healthy, not get well or not be at 100%, they're going to have difficulty in matching up with Lancaster. Plus, the game is at Lancaster grass field. The Tigers love turf. They don't like grass.
Yeah, no, that home field advantage definitely will come in, or will be in Lancaster's favor a little bit. That should help them out. Obviously, last year's matchup at all high on turf. But staying in AA, there's a couple of other matchups. A little bit of lopsided or potential to be lopsided games. Orchard Park hosting Hutch Tech at 7 p.m. And then Jamestown, the Red Raiders, They host the Lockport Lions at 7 o'clock as well. I assume that your expectations are kind of the same as mine, that Jamestown and Orchard Park should both roll the victories in that one.
Well, you look at Jack Sharp in 4 games, over 1,000 yards passing, I think 16 touchdowns or 15 touchdowns, and Hudstech will not match up with them, and you have to give it to the Quakers. Jamestown had a really outstanding win against Clarence last week. Trey Drake, the freshman quarterback, threw for 3 touchdowns, I think over almost a couple hundred yards passing. And they have Savon Van Sickle, who's candidate for all Western New York honors. So I just think the talent level with Jamestown will give them the edge.
In A1, we got a matchup. West Seneca West, the team that we talked about a little bit earlier, defeated Williamsville North last week at Williamsville North. They are hosting North Tonawanda on Friday night, a team that currently, I believe they are 1-3 in the league. So this is kind of a make or break situation for the Lumberjacks. And on the other side, for the Indians, this is kind of a game where if they win this, it seems like they lock up a playoff position. And for North Tonawanda, if you win it, you keep yourself in the race. If you drop the game, it seems like the last 2 games might not be enough to get you in.
Lumberjacks really leave a lot to be desired. They just don't have the talent this year, and that's why they're 1-3. They don't match up well with West Seneca West. And when you take a look at Schuer, who's the quarterback and also an outstanding lineman, and you have Dylan Weir, who's an outstanding linebacker. He had 14 tackles in last week's game. And then if you have Mike Linsky, who's been all West New York linebacker for 2 years, they're a team to deal with, and they're getting better and better. Plus, Liam Schuer wanted to be quarterback for the last 2 years, but then Matt Myers came in and another quarterback came in. So now this is his year, and he's a load, both running as well as being on the line. So I have to give the edge to not the Indians.
So we go from one West Seneca school to the other. The Trojans from West Seneca East, they're looking to bounce back from what was a very lopsided game against South Park last week. They are at Kenmore East. The Bulldogs, a team that, another one on the outside of the playoff picture looking in. This is the potential for a bounce back game, I would say, for the Trojans.
I would think so. I think Kenmore East has struggled the last few years. I think 4 or 5 years ago they didn't have a team. And, the coaching staff do the best they can, but have to give the edge. But one of the things that I noticed, the first 2 games, Davari Mathis lit it up on both running and scoring touchdowns. He didn't do that much in the last couple of games against 2 outstanding teams. It'll be interesting to see if he gets back up with his wheels. I wouldn't be surprised if he had over 100 yards and a few touchdowns in the game against the Bulldogs.
And that's a team where they've played some close games this year. They gave Star Point a game earlier this season. They've had some close ones, just haven't really been able to get a lot of W's. Sticking in A2, we already talked about Star Point and South Park, the marquee matchup in that league coming up. But we also have a team the team that beat Star Point last week in Sweet Home, kind of kept their season alive in some ways. And this week they're playing a non-league game against a team that I'll peel back the curtain a little bit. Being an alum of Sweet Home, we don't typically play Amherst a lot in some things, but despite them not being in the same league, I still feel like this is a little bit of a rivalry game between Sweet Home and Amherst.
Well, it can be, but then if you take a look at Williamsville South, they bombed the Tigers, and I think they won 56-18. And if you look at that performance, and Amherst has got some quality, skilled kids in playing at different positions, but particularly the skilled kids. I just don't think that they have the talent to match up with Sweet Home. Sweet Home got a big victory to give them a lot of momentum. They didn't win a game last year. They're now 2-2. They're going to be in the playoffs. And if Jamal Lucas is healthy, I don't think anyone, even South Park, wants to play them.
Wow, that is some high praise for the Sweet Home quarterback right there. He's obviously, yes, he is. He's one of the best athletes in Western New York. Moving over to B, this is a big game, Dick. Pioneer versus Lakeshore. So Pioneer 3-1 in the league right now. Lakeshore 2-2. If the Eagles can win this game, it definitely shifts the playoff picture a little bit in the B1 division.
I don't think Pioneer is going to let down. They're upset that they lost the game to Cheektowaga with the 4 turnovers. And I think talent-wise, particularly Denton Tilley, who's 6'5", 250 pounds, had 14 tackles, a couple of sacks in last week's game. They don't match up on the line, and so you got to give the edge to the Panthers.
And then as we move down into B2, Maritime, team that we mentioned, lost to Canisius pretty handily last week, but they're playing Medina this week. And then also Maryvale, a team that's also been on a skid a little bit as of late. They play Dunkirk at 7:30 on Friday night. What do you expect to see from the Flyers? Is it time for them to kind of make a bounce back? I mean, Connor Desiderio, he's a guy who's got a lot of experience playing here in Western New York, and that's a pretty talented group, I think. And a lot of people are surprised at the season that they've had so far.
Well, I think that when you look at Connor, he's the 4-year starter at quarterback. But you look at when Medina beat them by 3 touchdowns, and people were saying, how did that happen? And I think what it is that the Flyers are missing some of the linemen that they have had in the last couple of years, and as well as the running back that they had the last couple of years. So I'd have to give the edge, not to the Flyers. But when you look at Brian Pry, who's out Western New York, shortstop in baseball, outstanding linebacker, outstanding athlete. That game to me is a toss-up between those two.
And then down in B3, we got a pair of games. Olean and Albion at 7 o'clock, and Springville and Depew kicking off at 7 o'clock as well. Anything interesting from either of those matchups to look out for?
I think Olean is very quick. They're outstanding defensive. Nick Fratellangelo is a 3-year starter and captains that team, and just is an outstanding 2-way player. And he acts as a catalyst for the rest of the Huskies. And I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Albion. I wouldn't even call it an upset. But Albion, when you look at what they've done the last couple of years, what they did last week against Lackawanna, and so to me that game's a toss-up. And whoever wins that game is going to have a leg up related to being able to be first or second, and then being able to get into the playoffs.
Another matchup in Class B, this one in the B4 division, that could have a lot of implications on the playoffs. Newfane is at Tonawanda Friday night. Newfane sitting at the top of the division, and the Warriors, while they are, I believe, yes, they're 1-2 overall, but they're 1-0 in the league. I mean, this is a game where if the Warriors can win this one, they would surpass Newfane and sit at the top of that division.
Well, Tonawanda lost a couple of games by 3 points total, and they're getting better, and they've got some decent players. But in order for the Warriors to win, they're going to have to stop Jaden Heers, who's over 400 yards rushing, scored about 8 to 10 touchdowns. And I'm pronouncing the person's name, I think it's Garrett Stroke, but he's got over 400 yards and about 6 or 7 touchdowns. They got the dynamic dual running back in Class B, so I think the Warriors are in for a tough time, but that's why they play the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And this game that's coming up also between Eden and Brigard, 2 teams that are at the bottom of the division, but like you said, they always play the game. That's why you play the game. Is there anything to look for in this matchup between 2 teams that are on the outside looking into the playoff picture?
You mean Tonawanda or
Brigard and Eden? Brigard and Eden are playing.
I'm sorry.
Brigard and Eden.
Oh, Eden. Yeah. Well, Eden, scored 20 points a couple of games ago, but I just don't think. Put it this way, I think that game's a toss-up.
Yeah.
Eden's got some players, and the quarterback Schroeder's outstanding 2-way player, and one thing, every game they play, the Raiders, they just give 100%. So if they give 100%, they get a turnover and avoid the penalties. Because in all the games that we talked about, if you avoid the turnovers, you avoid the penalties, you get a good shot at winning.
Yeah, absolutely. So Moving down to C, Wilson, they're hosting Cleveland Hill coming off of their big win over Akron last week. Cleveland Hill still trying to kind of rebound from the big loss at Akron a few weeks ago. They're 1-3. This could be a game where the Golden Eagles might have to win to save their playoff hopes. And really, I mean, it would be quite a shock if the team that's won the last 3 sectional titles in Class C kind of misses the playoffs altogether. I mean, is this really a make-or-break game for this Eagles team against the team that's the top in their division?
I don't think so. I think that with Silver Creek beating Cleveland Hill by 30 points, that hasn't happened in a decade. I think really that Wilson is going to go in. Drew Westmoreland is an outstanding player. Bill Atlas is an excellent quarterback. And I just think that Cleveland Hill might get shut out. But then when you take a look at the way that 7-team league is, Cleveland Hill might still have an outside shot, but they're going to be in the 4th spot playing the 1st spot at Southwestern. So even if they get in the number 4, they're not going to make it past the playoffs. And the surprising thing is when you take a look at what the Golden Eagles have done in the last 5-10 years, amazing run, and they just got a down year, and I'm sure Glenn Graham will be looking to improve the rest of the games this year as well as in the future years.
Another interesting matchup in the C North. Akron trying to bounce back from that game against Wilson last week. They're hosting JFK. The Bears finished 2-7 last season. This year, kind of on the up and up. They've played some close games this year. They're 2-2 overall, 1-1 in the league. If they can pull what I think many would think is an upset over Akron, they would be putting themselves in a pretty good spot going into the final couple weeks and rolling into the playoffs.
Right, and I think Jax Lighton, the running back for the Bears, is an outstanding player, and Darrell Dabney, who's a big lineman. But if you really take a look at Akron, I think the heart and soul of that team went down with Adam Meats. I don't think he's going to be able to play this week. And then if you take a look at how they dominated Cleveland Hill, but then when you're going to go against, JFK, then I think JFK's got a shot against Akron. I've seen it where kids play football, they practice all year, first play of the game, they get hurt. It happened to my son years ago. Didn't play the rest of the year, one play, injured. You really feel sorry for Adam and the Tigers, but you know they're going to come to play. Andrew Krause does an outstanding job. So it's a toss-up. The Bears, like you mentioned, 2-7. Akron's been pretty consistent the last few years, so we'll see.
Yeah, and the Bears, I mean, they played Wilson, I believe it was week 2 at Kennedy, and they played the Lakemen pretty close. I think from what I remember, it was a 16-13 or 16-12 final around there. I mean, they're a good team, so it's going to be interesting to see how they go.
Your memory is exceptional.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Moving down to C South, couple interesting games. Allegheny Limestone and Portville, they're taking on each other. Portville second in the division, Allegheny Limestone in third. Both 2-1 in the league. So obviously the winner of that one pushes themselves up a little bit and makes things a little bit more comfortable going into the playoffs. For what I assume they will both be playoff teams.
Well, when you take a look at it, Portville has been down a few years. They were D school, they're going now C school. I really think that they're very competitive this year, and so is Allegheny Limestone. So I think that game is a toss-up. But Portville last year, I think, had 50 players on the team. Majority of those kids were young, freshmen, sophomores, juniors. Now what you have is really a team that's got a lot of confidence now, and I'm not sure where that game is played, whether is it at the Panthers?
I think it's at Allegheny Limestone, I believe is the home.
But I think, that game will ensure one of those teams is a playoff spot. But I think those 4 teams, when you have Fredonia, when you have Southwestern, Allegheny Limestone, and Portville, and maybe Chautauqua Lake, those 4 or those 5 will be in the playoffs.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Fredonia and Chautauqua Lake because they match up Friday night as well at Chautauqua Lake. Both them and the Fredonia Hillbillies 2-2 in the league. This is a game where we talked about with Portville and Allegheny Limestone. Those two are likely to be in the playoffs, both with the winner and the loser. But for this Fredonia-Chautauqua Lake game, it could be, a loser goes home sort of thing. Whoever drops this game might find themselves in that 5 spot on the outside of the playoff picture.
Well, I think with Chautauqua Lake, they beat Gassalega Valley Falconer by 1.7 to 6. And if you take a look at Fredonia, Jake Skinner, 6'4", 230, Division I prospect. He's got 41 tackles in 3 games. He's a force. He's a monster. So if he has a good game and they're able to avoid the turnovers, they could have the edge. But I think when you take a look at who the coach was last year, who retired, and it was to me one of the better coaches ever in New York State, in Western New York, and I can't believe that I'm blocking.
See, now this is where, if I knew the name, maybe it would have worked out, because you compliment my memory. I should have known the name. We would have been able to help each other out there. But sticking with C-South, one other game just to touch on, Cassadaga Valley and Falconer, they're at Gowanda, 2 teams at the bottom of the division. This one probably just a toss-up as well.
Right.
Moving down to D, before we go to Monsignor Martin, Randolph and Cattaraugus Little Valley. That's one of the 2 matchups on Friday night down in Class D. Anything you're looking for in that one?
Randolph should have an edge.
Yeah. And then CSP Salamanca, probably same story. We're giving the Clymer Sherman Panama Wolfpack the edge in that one.
In Class D, when you have Hinsdale throwing to Barmore, that should do it by itself. Never mind the rest of the team.
Yeah, no, Hinsdale Barmore, I got to watch them in action for the first time at the stadium last year in the sectional championship game against Maple Grove, and I was a little surprised that CSP dropped a game this year already. But yeah, that is a very solid group heading into the playoffs this year.
Well, when you take a look at Franklinville and Ellicottville, the number of kids that they have returning, outstanding players. Then if you look at the line that CSP lost to graduation, they might have returned in only 1 lineman. That can be the difference, particularly with Titans, Franklinville, Ellicottville.
Now, there's a couple other games I want to touch on because we talked about earlier. McKinley and Kenmore West are playing Tuesday evening. That's the evening that we're recording this right now. Most people are going to be watching this after the game's over, but both the Macs and the Blue Devils, they're going to have to play on short rest this week. They're going to be playing Tuesday, and then I believe Hamburg is hosting, or McKinley is hosting Camberg on Saturday the 5th. And then Kenmore West will be in action as well. So do you feel like for 2 teams, I know it's high school football, it's not the exact same as college and the pros, but how difficult will it be for these 2 teams to be playing on a little bit of shorter rest?
I think the McKinley-Hamburg game was scheduled for Friday. You had to move it to Saturday. And the reason for that was that when you play Tuesday, you need 4 days off before you're going to play again.
Oh, so they did move it. It's not happening on Tuesday.
They had to, move Hamburg's game.
Yeah.
And so that when you take a look at what they do, and then they come back. But, when you look at I think the leader and the amount of talent on on Kenmore West, that's why you play the game. And kids are not going to look, well, it's 5 games to 6 games between games. It's going to be, we're playing Tuesday, we're playing Saturday. They'll be ready to play. Ryan Davis will have the Max ready to play. It'll be smash mouth football at its best.
Yeah, and Kenmore West, they will be hosting Niagara Wheatfield on Saturday, so that's an interesting matchup. The Falcons, they lost their starting quarterback from last year, Jordan Parks, but Russ Nixon's got a solid group over there. I think that he's building a solid program over the last few years, a good foundation, and that's a team that no matter where they are in the standings, they're going to give you a hard game. So that's a tough one for the Blue Devils coming up.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, let's look at some of the Monsignor Martin games this weekend. You talked about St. Joseph, St. Francis. That is obviously, the game that most eyes are going to be on. But St. Mary's and Cardinal O'Hara taking each other on as well in a Western New York matchup.
One, you got to make sure that Cardinal O'Hara is going to be able to play, given the fact that they didn't play the first game and didn't play the third game. So you have to worry about that. But that game's a toss-up. Cardinal O'Hara last year had outstanding talent all those kids graduated, and they're struggling just to get numbers. St. Mary's got 35, 40 players, and that game between those two teams, if they do play, is just going to be a toss-up.
And then the other game, Canisius hosting Erie High School, another team from Pennsylvania. I don't know too much about Erie High School. Is this going to be another game for the Crusaders that's similar to those first 2 weeks of where it's a team that's a little bit, a tier above them or so? They have more talent, more bodies maybe. I mean, is this going to be another one of those situations for the Crusaders?
Erie, Pennsylvania produces outstanding talent in the 3 high schools, and plus those kids going on to college. I just think that the Crusaders were able to get that win over West New York Maritime last week. They found their path. They have outstanding talent, and if they avoid the turnovers, avoid the penalties, they should defeat Erie.
And then one other game in Section 6 that I actually missed when looking through this the first time. It's my first day doing this. Obviously, some mistakes are going to be made. But the one other game in Section 6 going on Saturday is Niagara Falls and Frontier. So another AA matchup. Frontier winning, what was it, 53-50 the other week, putting up a lot of points. Yeah, so that could be an interesting matchup between those two teams. Niagara Falls and Lockport played each other kind of closely too, so this is an interesting one between the Niagara Falls and Frontier.
And Frontier, I think, beat Hudstack 28-26. And when you look at that game, Frontier had been down for a few years. They were in the sectional championship back in 2015.
Right, played Jamestown, I think, 16. Right?
And so they're back, and they have 2 wins in a row. So they're being okay. Niagara Falls, you never know with the Wolverines what they're going to do if they come to play. But to me, that game's a toss-up. And all I can say is Chuck Tilley, who got 100 wins in coaching and came back last year to coach the Falcons and turning that program around, he'll have his team ready. So to me, that game's a toss-up, and with the exception of one team, which could be Hudstack, all the other 8 teams in Class AA are going to be playing in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting because, like you said, that's why you play the game. Obviously, there's favorites in that division. There's the Lancasters, the Orchard Parks, the Bennetts. But, there's a team in Frontier that can put up 50-something points. You've got a Clarence that showed that they can beat Lancaster. Jamestown is still in the mix. With an 8-team playoff format, especially with all of them having played each other at some point this year, most of them having played each other, it's, anything can happen. There could be some upsets in that one. And, not the teams that people are expecting to be in that sectional final might not end up being there, if you
play the team during the regular season and have to play them in the playoffs, you better understand, difficult to beat a team once, almost impossible to beat a team twice. So if you got beat, you better be ready to play. If you won the game, you better be focused and ready to play, because the other team's going to want to even it out.
Yeah, and it can be a totally different game. Last year we saw it, week 4, that Bennett and Lancaster matchup. It was an absolute shootout. Final score was in the 40s, 30s. They go and play at the stadium. Lancaster wins 17-6. It's a completely different style of game.
Yeah, it's just for one thing. The coach that I forgot, Kurt Fisher, was at Maple Grove. He's a legend. Went over to Chautauqua Lake. Was there for 1 or 2 years, retired. He's over 225 wins, 2 or 3 state championships, several league titles, several sectional titles. Been in 20 sectional championship games. So when you take a look at Coach who was at Chautauqua Lake and he leaves with all that experience, etc., then the next coach following him is following a legend.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. We wanted to make sure that we got that out there. We wanted to make sure that information was shared. But Dick, this was great. Thanks for having me in here and chopping it up with me for a little while.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Frank will be back, I assume, next week for the WNY Athletics High School Football Weekly YouTube show. Before we go, I just want to thank our sponsors again. G&G Fitness, the West-Her family of dealerships, Scroy Financial, UBMD Orthopedics, A-Turf. And with G&G Fitness, I also want to mention one thing you can check out is the Stadium Blitz. It's a 5K race with an obstacle course that goes through New Era Field. That's coming up on October 12th. And to register for that event, you can go to stadiumblitz.com. As far as tuning into high school football stuff, we'll have Mixler broadcasts coming up this week on Friday and maybe Saturday. I don't want to guarantee that yet, but we'll have Mixler broadcast Friday night. Stay tuned to the WNY Athletics Twitter page, Facebook page, and of course our YouTube page where you'll be watching this for all the updates and action from high school football here in Western New York. But that's all for us today. For Dick Gallagher, I'm Jon Simon, and thanks for tuning in with us.
WNYathletics.com is the premier high school sports website in Western New York, providing the best sports coverage of Section 6 and Monsignor Martin leagues. Check out our page for daily game recaps and late-breaking sports news. Our online scoreboards are updated in real time. Never miss a goal or touchdown. Visit WNYathletics.com today or follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube.